Gender-based violence remains widespread in Kenya, with survivors facing trauma, silence, and stigma. Kenya's public debt has crossed 12 trillion shillings. Debt servicing is now consuming more than half of government revenue, intensifying the cost of living crisis and reshaping fiscal policy choices. Artificial intelligence is accelerating misinformation and disinformation, blurring the line between fact and fabrication, placing new pressure on journalism and public trust. And wetlands across the country continue to disappear, threatening biodiversity, water security, climate resilience, and the livelihoods of surrounding communities. Hello, live from In Focus News, I'm Sidi Omari, and we welcome our viewers in Kenya and around the world. Here with you for the next 25 minutes, we take a closer look at national and global developing stories, touching on how policy choices, legal frameworks, and economic pressures are shaping daily life. Thank you for joining us. This is In Focus News. You can join the conversation on our social media handles at InFocusNews on X, Instagram, and Facebook, and with the hashtag IfNews across all platforms. On to our top story. Gender-based violence remains one of Kenya's most persistent and underreported human rights and public health crises. National surveys showed that nearly 1 in 3 women have experienced physical or sexual violence in their time, most often at the hands of an intimate partner or someone known to them. However, only a fraction of these cases are ever reported. Prosecutions remain limited and convictions even rarer. While Kenya has laws on paper, including the Sexual Offences Act and the Protection Against Domestic Violence Act, many survivors still encounter stigma and economic dependence to their assailant. Additionally, fragile access to health, recovery, and justice services, which can break down at multiple points, increases the risk for survivors to fall through the cracks. Anas Jenga reporting.
In police stations, hospitals, and court corridors, the scale of gender-based violence in Kenya becomes visible. For many survivors, the violence is only the beginning. What follows is a long and uncertain process shaped by fear, delay, and fragmented systems that often struggle to respond in time. Medical care is usually the first point of contact, yet health facilities vary widely in capacity. Many survivors arrive with untreated injuries, psychological trauma, and little understanding of their legal options. While Kenya's laws provide for protection orders, medical care, and prosecution, enforcement remains uneven, especially in rural areas where specialized GBV units and forensic services are limited. Reporting to police introduces a new set of barriers, where long waits, repeated questioning, and a lack of privacy discourage follow-through and increase the likelihood of cases being abandoned. Even when cases are recorded, progression is slow, especially in cases where the victim is economically dependent on the abuser.
This is my personal opinion, that men need to be held accountable for the way they treat people in their lives. I feel like they need to be told that, okay, they don't need to be told, they should be knowing that violence, whether towards a man or a woman, should never be a thing. Violence is never the answer, in my opinion.
I can say basically for aspects of women who have families, mostly it's protecting their children in terms of just wanting their children to be within a stable sort of environment. And most of them usually bring the aspect of they do not want their children to be raised without both parents. So you find situations whereby most of the time it is the woman who ends up sacrificing her life or her lifestyle for the purposes of ensuring her kid has both parents, that is the father.
And the unfortunate bit is the people in those situations don't realize that it's not normal. Like they get beaten or they get, the things just happen in the relationship and they stay. They're like, oh, he'll change or oh, she'll change, and I don't understand. Like, people need to know that it's not normal and it's not okay.
Survivors who rely on perpetrators for housing, school fees, or basic needs often withdraw complaints or decline to pursue charges. Civil society organizations often step in to fill these gaps, offering shelter, legal guidance, and trauma support. But demand far exceeds capacity, leaving many survivors without sustained assistance.
For us, we have the GBV, Gender-Based Violence Prevention and Response of 2014 that we work with. We also have the male engagement policy that I was telling you about. We have the national women economic empowerment, whereby we have a policy that gives us the mandate to economically empower women. We also have the Women in Peace and Security. We have a document under the UNSCR that also gives us the mandate just to ensure we give guidelines on peace and security. We also try and follow the other acts or the other policies like the Children Act, the Basic Education Act, the Health Act. We bring them on board, we incorporate them so that we are able to have a holistic framework on how best to tackle GBV. But those are just some of the strategies or guidelines that we have, policies we have that we are working with.
When access to healthcare, psychosocial support, and justice is fragmented, the system unintentionally shifts the burden of proof and persistence onto victims. The result is a cycle where violence is widespread, but accountability remains rare, reinforcing silence and underreporting. Ernest Njenga, In Focus News.
Ernest, you have been following this story for some time now. Surveys show that majority of the women who face GBV face it either at the hands of intimate partners or someone they know. What can you tell us about this?
The pattern is consistent across national surveys and expert research. Most gender-based violence in Kenya happens within intimate relationships or familiar settings rather than random attacks. There has especially been a rise in post-date violence. Specialists explain that intimate partner violence is driven by power and control, where abuse is used to dominate a partner. These dynamics are reinforced by social norms that still treat violence in the home as a private issue, making it easy for abuse to continue unnoticed and unchallenged.
And when survivors encounter this violence, what prevents them from seeking help or reporting it?
Survivors face a combination of personal, social, and systemic barriers. Many fear retaliation or escalation if they report. Others worry about stigma, being blamed, or not being believed. Economic dependence is also critical, as reporting can mean losing housing, financial support, or custody stability. There is also low trust in the justice system, where survivors have seen cases stall, evidence mishandled, perpetrators released without consequence.
When they eventually decide to seek help, how effective are the systems meant to support them?
Support systems do exist, but access remains rather fragile and uneven. Survivors may struggle to reach health facilities in time for treatment or forensic documentation, especially outside major urban centers. Others encounter untrained staff, delays in police response, or slow judicial processes. When health services, police, and the judiciary fail to coordinate, survivors are forced to navigate multiple system failures while traumatized, and many ultimately disengage. These breakdowns significantly contribute to low prosecution and conviction rates.
Thank you, Ernest. Joining us to further dissect this issue is Margaret Nyambura, Advocate of the High Court of Kenya. Welcome, Margaret. So we're talking scale. What do you think is the true scale of GBV in Kenya?
So you gotta realize that some cases are reported, others go unreported for various reasons. Some of the statistics that we've had in the past year have told us that in 2024 alone, we had cases as many as 170 on femicide alone. These are people who've been killed because they're women. So there's the murder aspect, but on top of it, the mental element behind the crime is that they're women. For GBV, what we hear from the Gender-Based Violence Recovery Center at the Nairobi Women's Hospital tells us that they receive in some months as many as 4,000 cases on gender-based violence. There are so many others which go unrecorded because probably people, their culture prevents them from speaking about what happens indoors. It's also possible that some cases of femicide are not caught because either the bodies have not been identified or because it was also an operation that, was not uncovered. So for instance, if a body is to be found at the city mortuary and there is no media coverage or no police reports or the family is not involved, it's not possible that you will account for that body either.
From your perspective, where does the reporting chain break down? Is it in police stations, hospitals, or both?
It is possible that you could have the break at any point. So for instance, work with me. So if I am a survivor of repeated domestic violence at home, I'm probably afraid that should I report it, I'm going to lose access to this home, or you're going to imprison the person who is the sole breadwinner, who also happens to be the perpetrator of the violence. So at that point already, I don't place a charge or I don't report the violence at the respective gender desk, or I don't tell anybody, right? So let's say I even go ahead and tell somebody. It's possible that when I go to hospital, because I'm also afraid or I don't even know what language to use and how to express myself, it is caught as general body pain and it's not caught as physical violence. I could probably come and say I fell down the stairs, the chair struck me, this fell down as I was doing house chores and it hit me, and this is the reason why I'm black and blue here. At that point, it also doesn't go into record as a case of gender-based violence, right? Let's say it even goes ahead and is reported as a case of gender-based violence, and you're brave enough to place a report at the relevant gender desk in a police station. What if the person who is manning that desk decides that they are going to run the case through what their value system is, and for that reason they decide that you're the one who's in the wrong, and therefore you ought to take a step back, apologize, and go back to your home? At that point, it doesn't make it into the occurrence book, and therefore is not identified as a crime. It's not assault, it's not battery, it's not grievous bodily harm. Neither is it in other cases rape or defilement. Let's take a step further. If you find that you even are able to make the recording and the report is put into the occurrence book and you go home with an OB, it's possible that prosecution is not usually done. Either the police tell you that their vehicle does not have fuel and therefore they cannot come and make an arrest, or they will make an arrest and shake down the man or the woman in that matter, and then they get a bribe from that, and at that point you don't proceed on to the next stage of prosecution.
Thank you, Margaret, for that insightful breakdown. Let's keep the conversation moving by interacting with our hashtag #IfNews across all our platforms. Global credit rating institutions, as well as the Bretton Woods, agree that Kenya is now classified as a debt-distressed nation. Public debt has crossed 12 trillion Kenya shillings, while the country's debt-to-GDP ratio stands at a nearly 69%, a level considered high for an economy with Kenya's revenue base and development needs. More critically, debt servicing now consumes more than half of ordinary government revenue, reducing funds available for healthcare, education, infrastructure, and social protection. At the same time, Kenyans are experiencing higher taxes, rising prices, and stagnant incomes, even as the government pursues new borrowing strategies and IMF-backed fiscal reforms.
Beyond headline debt figures, it is the structure of Kenya's borrowing that has drawn scrutiny. A growing share of government revenue is now locked into servicing existing debt, leaving limited room for development spending and economic shocks. Analysts point to a pattern where borrowing increasingly finances recurrent expenditure and short-term debt budget support, rather than projects that generate long-term returns.
The debt burden in the country is so huge that for every 100 shillings collected, 68 shillings goes to debt repayment. So basically, 32 shillings is what remains for development. When you look at it critically, 32 shillings is what takes care of the defense budget, education budget, the wage bill budget across government, as well as many other national government functions. The same 32 shillings is what the counties expect, at least 15 shillings of the same to go to them. So eventually you realize that within that 100 shillings, Kenya is not able to physically sustain itself within that bracket. And as a result, there has been a continuous borrowing to fill in the prevailing budget deficit. More crucially, it has made us to continuously borrow to repay loans and then borrow again.
The effects of public debt are rarely abstract. They surface quietly in household decisions about what to delay, what to drop, and what can no longer be affordable. As the government prioritizes revenue collections, consumers face higher indirect taxes that ripple through food, fuel, and transport costs, tightening pressure on an already strained income.
I think the political class is just emphasizing on what they think on their side is working, but when you come to the ground, things are different. People are actually sleeping hungry, others don't have jobs, people are actually suffering. So personally, I don't think the economy is doing good, but something can be done about it.
As repayment pressures intensify, the government has turned to domestic markets, increasing reliance on treasury bills and bonds held largely by local banks and pension funds.
It is a good policy because Kenya traditionally has been borrowing foreign loans in dollar-denominated currencies. And what basically that means, when the dollar gains against the Kenya shillings, we are able, as a country, our debt jumps off tremendously. You remember in the period 2022-2023 financial year, when the dollar reached a high of 160, every single day we were adding more than 8 billion in terms of debt, because every time a shilling depreciates against the dollar, because we borrowed using the dollar denominated denomination, our debt continues to increase.
This has had knock-on effects. Higher government borrowing has pushed up yields, raising the cost of credit for businesses and households, and tightening liquidity across the economy.
It is a good policy on paper, but to raise that money internally is also a lot of work, because what happens when you want to raise money internally, most of the times it is done through bonds and treasury bills. And what this does is that it crowds out private sector lending. What basically I mean is that government treasury bonds and bills have better returns than any other form of investment. So you realize that banks, especially the commercial ones, do a lot of buying of the treasury bills and bonds, and they cannot lend to the critical economic sectors of the country, including micro and small, medium enterprises, which are considered risky. Why would you want to lend your money to a struggling entrepreneur who you are not sure they will repay your debt, when government is offering lucrative terms, risk-free 10% or even 12% returns?
Under the medium-term debt strategy, authorities are attempting to rebalance maturities and smooth repayment peaks, but economists warn that debt sustainability depends as much on growth and revenue performance as on refinancing. For many Kenyans, the debt story is no longer an abstract microeconomic concept, but a lived constraint shaping growth, opportunity, and public trust. As debt management moves from policy to implementation, the real test will be whether this decision stabilizes the economy without quietly shifting the burden onto households already under pressure. That balance is where the consequences will be felt. Mario Ndichu, in Focus News.
We are now joined by Christopher Legilisho, economist at Stanbic Bank, to help us better understand the situation and policy implications. Thank you for making the time to join us today. Why is Kenya currently classified as being in a debt crisis, and how much of our 12 trillion debt is productive?
So I think the reason why Kenya is being said to be in a debt crisis is we had liquidity pressures in 2023 and 2024. At the time, there were a lot of concerns that Kenya would be unable to repay, particularly the Eurobond debt. There was 2 billion that the country needed to repay by June 2024. And so there was that concern that government didn't have the ability to pay. But it's fair to say that the government was able to repay thanks to support that it got from multilaterals like the IMF and the World Bank. And they were able to put together the resources they needed to pay that bond. When you look at overall debt to GDP, currently it's around 69% of GDP. We're characterized as in a high risk of debt distress. And there, to your question about the productivity of the debt, there has been concern that majority of this debt has gone towards infrastructure development, and typically infrastructure development has challenges in the sense that it takes time for the infrastructure to bear a return for the population, typically 20 to 30 years, while Kenyans, we would want to see the return quickly. So that multiplier benefit is what many have not seen from a lot of the infrastructure that's been developed by the government.
Kenya's debt to GDP ratio sits at almost 70%. Is debt to GDP a reliable measure of the crisis, or is there a better criteria?
It's a good measure to know the scale of your debt problem, but it's not the best measure when you're looking to whether a country is in crisis or not, especially a debt crisis. There are other metrics that we use. A good one would look at debt service to revenue, interest payments to revenue. For instance, at the moment for Kenya, debt service to revenue is around about 60%. So 60 for every 100 shillings that the government raises in taxes, 60 of that goes towards debt repayment. Interest to revenue as well looks at just the total amount of interest that we need to service. At the moment, that's around 30% of our total revenue. So it means that from every dollar raised or 100 shillings raised, that the country is paying quite a substantial amount going towards debt and not having sufficient resources left to invest in other more important developmental and social related activities.
The current policy direction under the medium-term debt strategy targets a shift to a 75% domestic to a 25% external split in gross borrowing. How realistic are the assumptions behind this strategy?
So from my previous history of how the government manages the debt, every year they issue a medium-term debt revenue strategy, and in it they will always reveal the skew of whether they're going to borrow domestically versus externally. For this current year, they intend to borrow more from the domestic market, and I think there is value in what they endeavor to do. It's better to be more indebted in your own currency than in a foreign currency, because when you are indebted or heavily indebted in external creditors, there is the currency risk that you have to factor in, which can also be quite punitive for a country. However, I would also caution that excess borrowing in the domestic market also presents risks. Currently, in Kenya's context, we're actually seeing that it's the domestic side where there's a lot of pressure. We're just considering the level of interest rates, especially over the last 2 years, versus where we are today. The debt service that the country needs to pay on the domestic side is quite high, and that's what is quite concerning to me.
Does this shift actually reduce exposure or transfer the debt burden to local banks and taxpayers?
So I would say it's not shifting the burden, because the burden would be there either way. It's just that the risks on the domestic side seem more palatable than having excess external debt. because excessive external debt introduces currency risk, and also you get indebted to multiple creditors. You could, if it's commercial, you have investors who will owe the country. If it's countries, if it's multilaterals, so you end up dealing with multiple kinds of creditors. While on the domestic side, you're typically just dealing with your citizens. So it's a better way to borrow rather than on the external side. And I would also argue that over time, our markets have developed. They're much more deeper today than they were a decade ago. So there is capacity in our domestic markets. So from that perspective, I think it's more prudent, but the risks for debt service are still quite high.
Thank you, Christopher. That was a very insightful discussion. Let's keep the conversation moving on our socials with the hashtag #IfNews. Up next, a fabricated video falsely announcing the death of a national political figure circulates online, shared thousands of times before it's debunked. How is artificial intelligence reshaping misinformation, and what does it mean for journalism and public trust? Stay tuned.
Faster speeds, safe and secure. Over 50 million Kenyans. One network. Safaricom. Popote ulipo.
Artificial intelligence now shapes how millions of people access information. However, recent interactions reveal that it's making misinformation faster, more convincing, and harder to contain by blurring the line between honest error, deliberate deception, and strategic manipulation. Earlier this year, the AI chatbot Grok drew global attention after changes to its system prompt altered its behavior, resulting in extremist and offensive outputs, an example of how internal AI design decisions can rapidly amplify misinformation and malinformation at scale. Closer to home, Kenyans recently encountered a more deliberate threat. A deepfake video impersonating journalist John Allan Namu, falsely reporting the death of former opposition leader Raila Odinga. We now seek to examine how AI-driven misinformation, disinformation, and malinformation are reshaping public trust and challenging journalism itself. Elsie Njenga reporting. Thank you, Elsie. We are now joined by Mr. Abraham Marita, Project Director at Internews. Thank you for making time. So, what makes false information so easy to believe on social media, and why are AI systems so prone to spreading false or harmful information?
Misinformation often follows a familiar pattern: fast, emotional, and difficult to contain. However, even then, it spreads slowly enough to be stopped early. What has changed is the technology behind it. AI tools allow fabricated content to mimic familiar voices, faces, and styles indistinguishable from authentic content, significantly lowering the cost and effort required to deceive large audiences and very rapidly diminish trust built over years in seconds.
I use AI for everything: school, personal issues, literally everything. I ask it everything. Yeah, it's like my best friend.
AI has advanced, and now AI is being used to be able to easily convince people about a particular thing. So there are people who would spread information that they are not sure if it's false or true, but it's believable, it looks believable, what we can call malinformation. In this case, AI can be able to develop a deep fake, so a deep fake or an image of an individual that looks real, or even a voice, a video, so that it's more or less like a true representation of the original version of the person who did this. So with the development of AI, these kind of narratives are easily spread because they tend to look believable.
Manipulated content now spreads across not only social media, but also private messaging platforms where corrections rarely reach the same audience. These platforms rely heavily on automated moderation systems which struggle to assess context, intent, or harm, especially in politically sensitive content. Cases involving deepfakes of public figures and journalists have underscored how quickly false narratives can gain legitimacy before verification occurs.
Of what we are attributing to platform accountability, where platforms themselves have integrated algorithms to be able to decide and provide information based on a user consumption pattern. I think in the early beginning we saw this as mostly being used to provide adverts or place adverts according to what a user is consuming online, but now this has changed to be able to more or less silo individuals in regards to what they're consuming. It's obvious in so many platforms like TikTok, like Facebook, that if you start consuming information where there's a lot of violence, the algorithm will continue providing you with such information or videos or content that basically continues to show violent actions taking place.
I'm able to tell AI videos, but like I think about my parents, are they able to tell if this is AI or not? But most of the time, they don't think they're able to recognize AI videos. But obviously, us Gen Zs, we can't recognize that this is AI videos because some of them are like really like they just look fake.
As audiences encounter repeated falsehoods, trust in all information, including verified reporting, begins to erode, creating fertile ground for disinformation and malinformation. With regulation lagging behind innovation, responsibility increasingly shifts to newsrooms, platforms, and audiences to identify truth in real time, often without tools or resources to do so effectively.
Yeah, it's I'll say that it's a big issue, especially when it comes to trust for traditional media. Like media is now facing trust deficits. Why? Because there's proliferation of misinformation, deepfakes, that are generated by AI. And basically what that means is that people no longer believe everything they see online. And when those who are basically perpetrating such information, when they use bylines or logos of media houses to portray a deepfake, then individuals who, for example, don't have proper digital media literacy cannot decipher and tell the difference whether this is a deepfake or this is true, or cannot be able to do a cross-checking with other platforms or verification. It means they will end up believing. And if they do believe and eventually come to learn that this deepfake was perpetrated using the platform of a certain media house, even though they were not able to verify that it was indeed that media house, it means that they lack trust in that particular media house.
As artificial intelligence makes false content harder to distinguish from fact, the challenge ahead is not only technological, but whether public trust can survive in an increasingly uncertain information space. Elsie Njenga, In Focus News.
Thank you, Elsie. We are now joined by Mr. Abraham Marita, Project Director at Internews.
My name is Abraham Marita. I work with Internews as a Project Director.
Thank you for making time. When we discuss ethical consideration, should AI developers and tech companies bear the brunt when their tools are used to spread misinformation, even if the misuse was not original intent?
Yeah, basically AI is good, has come to help us to do tasks that could normally take a lot of time to be done easily. However, we realize that if the AI is not developed ethically, or if the data that it's fed is not data that is ethical or true or correct, or that does not amplify other biases in society, for example, continue to degrade women or promote some bad social behaviors in community, and that data is used to train the AI, then it means the end product will be biased. So eventually, the people responsible for developing the AI and deploying it, whether it's being deployed by a social media platform or a technology company, should be held responsible for that. When it comes to governance, it means that every country needs to have proper governance in place, so laws and regulations in place to govern how AI is being developed, how AI is being used, to ensure that whichever AI we bring in the country and make it available to be used in the country is basically adhering to the local laws of the country and fundamental human rights laws, including freedom of expression, access to information, privacy, online privacy, to be enshrined, to ensure that these tools will not manipulate, will not contravene the laws of the land. And if that happens, then we expect at that point that the government can take action, and through our legal systems, such developers or tech companies can be held accountable for deploying tools that are basically harming the community.
So generative AI dramatically lowers the cost and effort to create highly convincing synthetic media. Comparing it to pre-AI disinformation campaigns, what is the biggest impact?
Yeah, I think basically the effect is larger now. To a large extent now, there's more effect, mostly because this kind of information spreads faster. It's more believable, and therefore people are easily convinced and can be able to share it even in cross platforms. So forgetting about just consuming it in one platform, I think on every post that you see, you can be able to go on it and click, and you can decide to share on every other platform that you might have, either it's a WhatsApp, either it's to Instagram or to Facebook or to any social media platform. So that basically continues the spread and makes it much faster. So making it like using the tech, the developed tools right now, it makes it easier for the content or the information to be very convincing, the manufactured content. So basically making it very believable and allowing its proliferation. We have seen AI being used to even speak in local languages, things that we had not thought about, but using even voices that are familiar, like the president's voice or other popular people's voices, and it makes it basically very relevant to individuals and easily spread to communities around.
Thank you for that engaging conversation, Mr. Marita. Wetlands are among Kenya's most valuable ecosystems, regulating floods, filtering water, supporting biodiversity, and sustaining livelihoods. However, across the country, wetlands and river systems are being rapidly degraded, with environmental assessments warning that this accelerating loss is threatening water security, food systems, and climate resilience. As human activities lead the charge, rivers that should sustain life are now under serious threat. Pollution from households, industries, and agriculture continues to flow into rivers, reducing water quality and threatening aquatic life. Kenya has environmental laws, including the Environmental Management and Coordination Act, designed to protect wetlands. However, questions remain about enforcement and whether current measures are sufficient to halt the ongoing degradation. Ding Akech brings us this report.
Environmental degradation rarely announces itself dramatically. It advances incrementally long before collapse becomes visible. Wetlands are often altered quietly through small diversion, incremental dumping, and gradual construction that escapes enforcement thresholds. Kenyan wetlands and rivers ecosystem are under increasing pressure, raising a concern about diversity loss and human well-being.
Nairobi was a wetland area. It has now been occupied by buildings, and those wetlands are no more. We don't see them anymore because we have constructed a lot of constructions, and therefore the wetlands are degraded.
Across the country, wetlands play a critical role in supporting wildlife, regulating floods, purifying water, and sustaining livelihood. Experts warn that many of these ecosystems are now degraded, flooded, or shrinking at an alarming rate. An example is the Nairobi River and its tributaries, commonly known for heavy pollution from household, industrials, and informal settlement, which are sections heavily contaminated.
If I can base my argument on the particular wetland that I did my study, that is Sironga wetland in Kisii, currently it is under threat. It is being drained for construction, and the kind of construction that is coming up there is on the affordable housing. That is the construction. And for me, it looks like it's going to completely remove those major wetlands in Kisii. And currently, if you go to Kisii, you see that most of the areas are planted with eucalyptus trees. Eucalyptus trees are not very friendly, and they are therefore taking away the water resources that we have in the place.
Scientists want that wetlands loss weaken natural floods control and water filtration, increasing the cause of disasters when heavy rains occur. Despite legal protection, enforcement remains inconsistent, split across the national and county authorities with overlapping mandates.
As I grew up, you would find water every place that you actually went to. You will not go for a kilometer without getting a wetland, without getting clean water, but now we don't have it anymore. Most of them have been degraded. Most of them have been planted by eucalyptus trees. And I realized when I was doing my study that most of the people would use eucalyptus trees to make bricks. And because the eucalyptus trees, once they are planted in a wetland area, they grow very fast. So they would get their firewood, they would get their timber very easily. But this degrades the wetland. And as you might be aware, a wetland area would be productive in terms of crop production, but for the first few years. After that, it gets degraded and it's not productive anymore. Currently, what we have done on the highlands, most of the highlands in Kenya, is that we have converted them to other uses, and therefore we are having the problem of water availability.
As wetlands vanish, the cause is not only environmental, it is social, economic, and intergenerational. Nairobi rivers are a snapshot of the broader challenges facing Kenyan is wetland, and question remains about whether enforcement of existing environmental law are strong enough to reverse the damage. Dean Akech, InFocus News.
Thank you, Ding. Joining us to analyze this issue is Dr. Jane Oteki, lecturer at the Technical University of Kenya. Welcome, Dr. Jane. How does pollution from industries, households, and even agriculture affect river ecosystems?
This one has a real great impact, because in the past you would fetch water from a river and that water was clean. It was good quality water. We are doing some research at the Kano Plains. We are looking at the Nyando Basin, and what we are seeing is that there has been a lot of pollution from human activities. And these human activities, we may not be able to really control them, because the population is increasing, land is not expanding, and as a result, you find that we encroach into these areas, and therefore the water that is from those areas, we did a lot of tests on this water, and we found that there's a lot of algal bloom, and therefore it is really affecting even the biodiversity, it's affecting the water quality, and we are really heading in the wrong direction unless we stop and do something else. We protect these areas.
How are the current gaps in policy enabling the destruction of critical urban green spaces and riparian reserves?
when you go to our policies, when you get to our land use planning and management, we have a land use policy, right? And we have the Department of Physical Planning. However, this is not adhered to the letter. So what happens is that much as we have the rules and regulations to manage this, you find that I think I would say either we are greedy, I would call it greed, because the laws are there. Land use planning, NEMA is there to look at all the environmental impact assessment things. And if you go to NEMA right now, you'll find a lot of reports, environmental impact assessment reports. But when you go to the ground, you find the opposite. Why do we find the opposite? Implementation is the big problem. And I think I would put all the blame on corruption, because we have the rules, the regulations, very well spelled out, but they are not followed to the letter. Okay, again, we are expanding. The land doesn't expand, right? So you'll expect that that may happen to some level, but we are not really mindful about our environment until such a time that you are told. For example, we had this building in Westlands. It was built on a river, the UK, until the floods came and flooded that place and showed that this is actually a river. Nobody was bothered about it, yeah? So, and yet, somebody licensed the building. How did they license the building? They licensed because of corruption. So we have the rules and the regulations, and we have everything good as far as the environment is concerned. But implementation is our main problem, and I'm blaming it on greed.
A new TV channel to make the little ones laugh as well as learn.
The issues examined today are not isolated failures. They reflect the consequences of governance under pressure, where law enforcement, fiscal policy, information systems, and land use planning struggle to keep pace with social, economic, and technological change. From gender-based violence to public debt, misinformation to environmental degradation, each story demonstrates how policy decisions and the gaps between them shape lived outcomes. Thank you for tuning in. Let's keep the conversation flowing on all our social media platforms at InFocusNews using our hashtag IfNews to stay in the loop. You're watching InFocus News. I'm your host, Sidi Omari.